Welcome, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to use lesson plans. So the purpose of the lesson plan is to help you to conduct the class in the most effective way, and it will help you to manage the class and how to stimulate the students to get the best from them. So we need to follow the ASK model, which looks at the teacher's attitude, their skill and their knowledge. And on this slide you can see a summary, but we're going to go into more detail. So firstly, with the attitude, the first one is that Topmito keeps their promise, and that is to ensure that we give the students our best and that we help them learn as well as they can. So we would start by introducing ourselves and where we're from and getting them to introduce themselves. And secondly, we need to be serious in the class. So we need to follow the topic of the day and to help them widen their knowledge on the topic of the day. Thirdly, we need to encourage the students to speak and not to be shy. So we have to give them encouragement and suggestions and help to make them feel more confident. And fourthly, we need to lecture and practice, which means that we need to give the students examples or lead them, and then they will practice themselves after that. So we will lecture them and then they will practice. And we will also help them by pointing out their mistakes and correcting them, and giving them an assessment and some feedback to help them improve. Okay, part number 5, we will help the students to take part in all of the activities. So we will be friendly and we will give them all opportunities to speak, and we will also make sure that we answer any of the students' questions in the simplest and the most effective way, so that we give them enough time to practice in the activities later on. I think very importantly, the teacher needs to be positive and also active in the lessons. So we need to be positive and not give any negative comments or feedback to the students, as this will affect their confidence. And we need to make sure that we give the students some examples and suggestions. So we need to be active and not just sit back. And finally, we need to ask the assistant to help translate if there's anything that the students don't understand, to make it a little bit smoother. Okay, number 7, we need to make sure that the class is comfortable for the students. So we should be funny and relaxed and flexible and help the students as much as possible, and avoid putting any pressure on them so that they feel relaxed, and then they will learn a lot better. And also very important, we need to be respectful to the students. So we need to pronounce the students' names correctly. So if we listen to how the students say their names and then try and pronounce them correctly. A lot of the names are difficult, so it may take a little bit of practice. Also, we want to avoid interrupting the students when they are speaking, and we want to answer the students' questions when they ask us, and we don't want to use any swear words or bad language. Okay, and point number 9, we want to be practical in the lessons. So we want to give all the students, firstly, an equal chance to speak, and to give them lots of chances to speak and practice. And number 10, also very important, we need to be happy and have fun with the students. So we can tell them some jokes, and we can make some fun comments, and we can make some fun actions related to the lessons so that the students feel relaxed and comfortable and have a good time. And the last point tied into this, we need to be friendly to the students and imagine them as one of our friends, and so we would smile at them, we'd avoid using some formal words and just be relaxed with them. Okay, so that was the attitude, and now we're going to move on to the skills needed. So we have 3 different parts. We have the listening, the speaking, and the conversation. And in each of these parts, we have to cover vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. And at the moment, we are dealing with 2 different levels of students, the basic and the intermediate, so not the advanced today. So if we look at the listening skills, we have to make sure that the students can understand, or they can listen to the words that we are learning, the vocabulary of the day. And for the intermediate students, they need to be able to listen to the words, but also listen to and understand some simple phrases, and also be able to pick up these words in conversations. And for the grammar, the basic, they need to be able to understand the one simple structure of the day, and the intermediate will need to be able to understand more complex sentences. Finally, pronunciation, they need to be able to hear the difference between the sounds, so the different sounds in the lessons. And for the intermediate, they need to be able to listen to more complex or difficult sounds. Okay, so moving on to speaking. So for basic and intermediate, we need to make sure that the vocabulary, they can pronounce the words and phrases correctly, and the teacher will help them. The difference, the intermediate, they will have more difficult phrases, and they need to also give their opinions. For the grammar, again, they will need to, the basic students will need to be able to say the simple sentence structure, so the one structure of the day. And the intermediate, they will need to be able to make some more complex and longer sentences using the more difficult grammar of the day. Finally, the pronunciation, the basic, they will have some easier sounds to pronounce, and the intermediate, they will have more difficult sounds to pronounce. And the last part, the conversation. So the basic students, they will need to be able to try and have a conversation using at least 5 sentences, and quite short sentences with at least 5 words in the sentence, and trying to use all or some of the vocabulary that they've learnt in the lesson. And in contrast, the intermediate students will need to create a more difficult conversation with about 10 to 12 sentences in or phrases using the grammar and the vocabulary they've learnt, and the sentences should be longer, containing around 10 words. Okay, and again, for the The grammar, when they are in the conversation, the basic students, they will need to create 5 sentences using the grammar that they learnt in today's lesson. And the intermediate, they will need to have a longer conversation using 10 to 12 sentences using the grammar from the lesson. And finally, the pronunciation, so in the conversations, they will need to try and use the sounds that they've learnt in those sentences. And the intermediate students, again, they will just need to have a longer conversation and make longer sentences using the words and the pronunciation sounds that they have learnt. Okay, and finally the last part, knowledge. The teachers need to understand the vocabulary, the grammar and the pronunciation of the lesson, and they need to be able to effectively make sure that the students can also understand this. So for example, the vocabulary, they need to make sure that the students understand the 6 new words. In the grammar part, they need to make sure the students understand the grammar structure of the day. And finally, pronunciation, they need to make sure that they can listen to and understand and pronounce themselves the minimal pairs, so the contrasting sounds. Okay, so that is the end of the first part. That sums up the ASK model. And so now we are going to go through what we would say on each of the slides and maybe how long to spend on each of them. So the first slide, it is an introduction. We will introduce ourselves and we will answer these 3 questions, and then we will ask the students to do the same. And if they don't answer any of the questions, then we can ask them directly. So on this slide, we're looking to spend about 5 minutes, and that's the same if we have 1 or 2 students or more students. If we have less students, we can ask them some extra questions or ask them to make a longer introduction. Okay, on the second slide, we have the warm-up video, and here we will play the video, and we have the button to play the video. Sometimes this won't play, so we will need to copy the link from the lesson plan that we just looked at, copy that link into the public chat box for the students. And again, here we're looking to spend around 8 minutes. If we have less students, for example 1 to 2, we can ask the students what they saw in the video and ask their opinion of it. And also it's good to have prepared some extra questions related to the video or related to the topic of the day. Obviously, if we have more students, then we will ask them less questions and ask them maybe just to describe what they saw in the video, just to save time. Okay, on the next slide, this is where we give an outline of what we will learn in today's lesson. So this just gives the students a brief description of what they're going to learn, and we should only spend about 1 minute on here. This is just a very quick slide. And this is where we really start the lesson. We start looking at the vocabulary, and here we will get the students to work in pairs. And on this slide, for example, one student will read out the definition and one will read out the vocabulary word. And we want to link these up using a straight line like the example, and it's a good idea to change the color of the line just so it's clearer. And then we will get the students to practice using the vocabulary words in a sentence, and very importantly, get all of the students to read and practice all of the words. So on this slide we're looking to spend about 7 minutes, and there are a couple of different styles. So we could be matching pictures with the words, or we could be matching the words with their definitions. Okay, on the 5th slide, this is the grammar slide, where they will be learning the specific grammar structure of the day. And we want to explain the rule quickly but effectively, and we want to give the students an opportunity to practice this, so to practice their speaking. So the students will be asking and answering each other questions, and we want to try and get them to practice all of the words. So on this slide we're looking to spend about 6 minutes, and we have a couple of different options. We have either asking and answering each other questions, or we have in the intermediate slides, we have sentences with a mistake in, and the students have to identify and correct the mistakes. And we also have a slide where the students get to create their own sentences using the structure. So on this slide you can see a couple of different examples. So on the left we have the finding and correcting the mistake, and on the right we have the asking and answering questions. And so we want to spend about 6 minutes on this slide. Okay, the next slide is the pronunciation slide, and here we want to read out all of the words in box A and B, and then get the students to practice this. So practicing their pronunciation and then practicing these new words in some sentences on the right. So here we want to try and spend about 4 minutes on this, and the basic and the intermediate are slightly different. So we have a couple of different options, either reading out the words and then making sentences like on the left, or like we saw on this slide, reading out the sentences to practice this. And we also have, like on the right here, the students will read out similar words with similar sounds and then read them in quite a fun sentence, often quite a difficult sentence for them to read, but excellent practice. And now on the 7th slide we will have the role play, and this is where we give the students a chance to really have a conversation, and we want them to practice using the vocabulary and the grammar that they've learnt today, and also making sure their pronunciation is correct. So we will ask the students to take it in turns, so one of the students being student 1 and the other being student 2. And if we have enough time, we will get the students to swap roles, so they get to practice both asking the questions and answering, and just practicing the different aspects. So On this slide, we're looking to spend about 8 minutes. We want to make sure we leave enough time for this slide. And if there is only one student, then the teacher will play one of the roles and the student will play another, and we will almost definitely have time to swap. And again, with 2 to 3 students, we will probably have time to switch the roles so they can practice both roles. But with 4 to 6 students, we are unlikely to have enough time. So the students may only get to practice one of the roles. Also, with the intermediate lessons, they will often have just some discussion questions rather than a role play. And here we're looking for them to have a longer conversation, around 10 to 12 sentences, and giving their opinion and using more complex vocabulary, grammar and pronunciation skills. Okay, so when we move on to slide 8, this is the wrap up. And the purpose of this slide, we are just recapping on everything that we've learned today in the lesson. And depending on how much time you have and how many students, we might only spend a couple of minutes asking them to tell us some of the words they learnt and maybe practicing the grammar structure or asking them some related questions. But if we have less students, for example 1 or 2, we might have some extra time left, and here it's an excellent chance to get them to speak more freely, to ask them some related questions, and for them to give their opinions on the topics, and really trying to use everything that we've learned in the lesson. Okay, and so the next slide is a very important slide where we give the students some assessment and some feedback from the lesson. So we will click on the assessment student button and we will give them some feedback on their pronunciation, vocabulary and grammar specific to each student. And we don't want to give any negative feedback, we want to give some constructive or positive feedback, some things that they did well, but also some things that they need to improve or work on. And here we want to make sure, this is a very important slide, that we leave around 3 or 4 minutes for this slide so we can focus on each of the students and give them each an equal amount of time. Okay, and the final slide, the homework slide, here we are asking the students to make a note of the assessment that we've just given them, or the feedback, and then we can suggest to them a couple of lessons at the bottom, and we want the students to search online on the Topmeter website and review these lessons just to further their studies. And so we want to just spend about 1 minute on this slide, and then we want to ask the students if they have any further questions, and if they do, we will answer the questions and then we will say goodbye to the students.